for today's. All right, I want to thank everyone for joining this month's Multnomah Group webinar. This month's topic is the future of in-plan lifetime income options. There's some things happening in the near future regarding some projections for lifetime income that we wanted to present, and we thought that we'd go ahead and include really everything that's sort of happening with regard to lifetime income. I should point out at the beginning that what we're really talking about is in-plan lifetime income options. So this would be an annuitization option that would be available inside of your retirement plan rather than outside of the retirement plan. So that's really going to be the major focus of today. A couple housekeeping items. As you heard, today's presentation is being recorded. We will take questions through the Q&A feature, though, if you have any questions as we go through this. Also, just for those who aren't as familiar with Multnomah Group, we thought we'd add a slide giving some of the information about the firm. We're an independent employee-owned consulting firm with 7 consultants located in Oregon, Washington, California, Texas, and I am coming to you from Denver, Colorado. And my name is Greg Johnson. I'm a senior consultant and the director of the Technical Services Committee. Joining me today is David Williams, who's a CFA, a senior consultant here, and he is the head of our investment committee. And for today's agenda, we're going to talk about, I mentioned some of the mandatory lifetime income projections that are going to start appearing on participants' statements, probably, well, it should be this quarter. Talk a little bit about some changes that were made as a result of the Secure Act to both the safe harbor plan for offering in-plan annuities and annuity portability. So what we're talking about here is how do you get an annuity into your plan, but then also how do you get it out of your plan if you decide you want to move away from a particular annuity provider. And then also I want to talk a little bit about some of the considerations that you might have if you're looking at adding an annuity in plan. But before we go into some of these legal and legislative items, I thought we'd first just talk a little bit about why is this conversation of annuitization coming up, and just what are some of the pros and cons of offering it within the plan. And for that, I think I'll turn it over to David to talk a little bit about what we're seeing happening in the industry.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Excuse me. So I think everyone who's on this call would have some familiarity with what committees spend time talking about in committee meetings focused on their defined contribution retirement plan. And historically, much of that focus, if not virtually all of that focus, has been on the accumulation phase. So defining that or illustrating that here at the bottom right hand of the page would be the yellow portion of this chart, which is just meant to show the typical growth in assets that a participant would see over their working career. And then the right-hand side, the blue section of that chart, that's the decumulation or the spend down portion of that participant's life cycle. So historically, we've really been focused on the accumulation side, getting participants to decide to be in the plan, to how much to contribute to the plan, what their investments, the investment offerings that are made available to them should be, talking about the employer contribution side, talking about, loans or in-service withdrawal features that could be added to the plan. But really, we've focused on much of our effort on that accumulation component of that participant life cycle. So as plans have matured and we're starting to see more and more participants have gone through that accumulation phase and really transitioning into retirement, we're really seeing kind of the first wave of participants that have only been in defined contribution plans or have only had defined contribution plans available to them. Many participants that retired in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s may have had a DC plan, but may have also during some portion of their working career had a defined benefit plan that provided some fixed level of income in retirement. So essentially replacing some portion of their paycheck. But as this first real significant wave of retirees that have only had defined contribution plans faces retirement, they're now faced with that question of how do I turn a nest egg into income? How do I decide how much of that nest egg I can take out on a monthly basis to pay for my essential needs? A couple of, I guess the risks associated with this, or the thoughts that are prompting committees to think about this, are illustrated in those statistics, which just show that, if you get to 65, the likelihood of you making it, 25 years into in retirement is fairly significant. 40% of people that hit 65 are expected to live to 90. That's a large portion of retirees. In general, retirees, especially if if you have a partner or a spouse, the likelihood that if you both hit retirement age and then will hit 90, that number increases quite a bit, that at least one of you will make it into 90. So there's a long period of spend down that needs to be managed. In general, participants are not very confident about their ability to have a comfortable retirement. I think that's a tough question to present to a survey participant. How comfortable are you about what your retirement will look like? I think is a really open-ended question, but what this highlights is that there's uncertainty there for participants, and they may need or may want to look to their employer for some help. And then that last statistic, there's a ton of statistics here around what is the common default investment option within defined contribution plans, those target date funds. So a target date fund, for those that aren't familiar, would just be a fund that would have an associated expected retirement date. So say the 2020 fund. So participants are expected to hit about 65 in 2020, and then stay in that fund through their decumulation phase. And that fund starts off as very high equity concentration and phases out of equities as they near retirement. One of the common misconceptions is that a target date fund is guaranteed to provide your income needs in retirement. Again, the question could be phrased in a way that it causes confusion, but essentially there is a lot of participant confusion about what a target date fund will or is intended to do. It's essentially intended to lower equity risk as you near retirement. It's certainly not, for the most part, as a category, intended to provide guaranteed income, although that is, again, a common misperception. So because we are seeing this first wave of participants move into retirement, and it is a confusing subject, there is risk associated with it, there's low confidence from a participant standpoint as they move into it. Plan sponsors are talking more about what their role can or maybe should be with respect to providing in-plan income solutions.
Yeah, and David, one additional thing, defined benefit plans are fairly complex to operate and to manage, probably compared to DC plans, defined contribution plans. But to the participant, it was pretty easy to understand, right? If I work X number of years, I get some percentage of my salary for the remainder of my life. That's really easy to understand. You know what you get paid today. You know what 75% of that is. You can put your pencil to paper and say, yeah, I think that's fine. In the current environment, your defined contribution plan, you certainly know how much money you've saved. But if you had a defined benefit plan, you don't know how much money your employer had to save to have that guaranteed income for life. So, I think there's a misconception that defined contribution plans are easier for participants to understand. But when it comes time to withdraw your money, I think in some ways it can be more, well, certainly more challenging than the defined benefit plan where you just start getting your money.
For sure. So the next two slides kind of start with, again, we've tried to define what we're talking about, which is that decumulation phase, and how in-plan solutions, in-plan income solutions can be added or supporting participants. But, kind of why, I guess this page really talks to the why consider adding an in-plan solution. I think to Greg's point just earlier, which is that a defined benefit plan clearly provides a participant with a predictable income stream that you can't outlive. I think that's the other component of that, is typically you're going to get X% of your final average salary for the rest of your life. Defined contribution plans, you have a pot of money, and the question is how much of that can I take out in any 1 month or year and not outlive that. So defined contribution plans don't have that pooling of risk component that a defined benefit plan does. And there's been a lot of discussion here as of late as to what is a sustainable withdrawal rate. Historically, there's been a lot of talk about a 4% drawdown rate. With challenges to future returns, maybe that 4% is not 4%, but it's 3.25 or 3.75 or 3%. What the point here is that defined contribution plans don't, as they're currently constructed without in-plan solutions, don't have that guarantee of not being able to outlive your savings. Shifting of risks, in-plan solutions shift that longevity risk. Again, to that point of, I have a nest egg, as I spend it down, I can't outlive it. Therefore, I've transferred that longevity risk to a third party. There's been a lot of studies done recently about anxiety with respect to finances. I think you can find statistics to support lots of arguments that you're trying to make, but there are certainly statistics out there that suggest that retirees are anxious about their financial future. Having an in-plan income solution that guarantees a certain amount of income allows participants to relax about what their financial future is, because they don't have to plan quite as dynamically for what that drawdown rate looks like. The in-plan solution is given that it provides a certain level of income on a monthly basis, it allows for you to budget towards your recurring expenses. So we're hearing more from providers talking to plan sponsors, not about adding annuities or in-plan solutions for a participant's entire accumulated balance, but for their fixed expenses or their anticipated fixed expenses. So if let's say you have $5,000 a month in expenses, and 3 of those are predictable fixed expenses, one suggestion we're hearing more and more is not annuitized for $5,000 worth of income, but for that those fixed expenses. Another area that we're hearing more and more about, particularly given what's been a challenging environment for equities and fixed income, is that a fixed annuity that could be used to convert for lifetime income solutions can be used during the accumulation phase to dampen return volatility, because it's not subject to changes in interest rates like a typical bond fund would be. So there's an advantage potentially during the accumulation phase, during those working years, to provide a fixed rate of return without the volatility associated with typical bond funds. And then the last bullet here, just attraction and retention. Can't remember the call I was on as of most recently, but they're talking with a client about the fact that HR manager trying to attract and retain people, they compete with employers that typically provide defined benefit plans, which, defined benefit plan, if you stay at one place the entire working career, provides, to Greg's point earlier, a very predictable and solid replacement of your working of your salary. But the issue for most defined contribution plan sponsors is you provide nice benefits and contributions throughout the working career, but it doesn't have that predictability of income. And so having an in-plan solution, in-plan income solution, can counteract the draw that maybe that employer that offers a defined benefit plan has relative to a defined contribution only benefit. On the kind of the cons, or the, call them considerations, on the downside, things to think about with respect to adding these options. One is, we have a lot of plan, I mean, and it's not on this page, but we have a lot of plan sponsors that when they are thinking about this subject, their focus is really on their active employees and that group only. And so their view is that my contract with my employees is until they decide to not work for us any longer. So there hasn't been as much focus on the kind of decumulation phase. But for those that are interested, in spanning the employee's entire kind of life cycle, maybe couple of the downsides with respect to lifetime income options is, depending on the features that are with the annuity, there may not be the ability to provide an inheritance. So if you bought an annuity that was a life annuity, and you die within, you die the next day, you've moved that money to the insurer, that money is not coming back and it's not able to be transferred to your heirs. So that's a risk associated with this irrevocable decision. Your participants are faced with how much do I want to annuitize? And once I annuitize, that money is now no longer mine. I've transferred it to the insurance company for the guarantee of a certain amount of monthly income for the rest of my life, or whatever the term that you set up. But that's a big decision. It's a cliff decision. And that the irrevocable nature of that decision can cause paralysis and anxiety with respect to the decision-making process. So I think what that points to is the importance of engagement strategy with your participants about what an annuity is early in their career, kind of throughout their working career, so they have a better understanding and not just faced with I'm now retiring, here's my decision point. I think that irrevocable nature of that decision leads to wanting to have more engagement. There are certainly restrictions and penalties that are put in place during the accumulation phase. So let's say we have that fixed annuity product in the investment menu during the accumulation phase. There's certainly some risk on the insurer by them providing a guaranteed rate of return, that they have to manage relative to their investment universe. And so when they have that risk, they put then restrictions on both the participant as well as the plan sponsor with respect to liquidity of those products during the accumulation phase. So that's something you certainly want to take a look at. And it's ultimately the return, or the annuity itself is only as good as the ability for that insurer to make good on the promise. So there is certainly a need to have good understanding of that counterparty risk associated with the insurer. And then finally, these decisions are really highly dependent on personal circumstances. And so making sure that you have an annuity with or an in-plan solution that has a broad set of features is an important thing to look at and understand. Do those features allow participants with enough choice to structure the payout in a way that works for them? I think I'll turn it back to Greg to take on the update from the Department of Labor with respect to annual lifetime income projections.
Yeah, thanks, David. That's a good synopsis, sort of, though, what some of those things are that you want to, what are the pros and cons of an annuity in general, not necessarily in plan, because certainly people have the option now, even if you don't have an annuity option in your plan, they can certainly take a cash withdrawal, they can do their own research, and they can identify an insurance company and purchase an annuity. So it's not like people are restricted from creating a lifetime income stream now. I do think that's a pretty big ask of a participant to figure all that out. And I do think it's true that an in-plan annuity probably, probably should be less expensive, more likely than not, than what you're going to get in the retail market. Before I talk about the annual lifetime income projections, we did have a question that came in: as a defined benefit plan the same as a pension? And essentially, yes, both create an income stream that lasts the life of the individual. So yeah, that's what we're talking about with defined benefit plans. So one of the things that's happening right now, the Secure Act had several lifetime income provisions, and one of them was to direct the Department of Labor to come up with some rules providing individuals with lifetime income projections. So this doesn't necessarily have to do with offering an annuity within the plan, but it goes to answering that question that I sort of mentioned earlier, that confusion that participants have. I've got $800,000. I don't know what that means. Is that enough? Is that not enough? And so beginning with the second quarter of 2022, so really the next statement that people should likely be receiving, plan sponsors will be including an annual lifetime income projection. And this projection is required to follow certain rules that the DOL set forth. I will sort of comment on that. I don't love the projection methodology that they use, but I understand why it is what they landed on. Essentially, what that projection is going to be, it looks at the individual's current account balance and tells them the annual lifetime income as if the participant is age 67 now. It doesn't really take into consideration future savings, doesn't take into consider future earnings. It just says, if this is the amount balance you have today and you were age 67, this is what it's going to create in a lifetime income. My concern is that for younger participants, I think it is going to be, these projections are going to be very, very low, resulting in them either just flat out ignoring them or creating some concerns that they're not saving enough. And so my recommendation really has been, to the extent that participants see these projections and maybe have questions about them, if they come into the plan sponsor with these questions, more often than not, I would probably encourage that individual to look to their record keeper's website and see what tools are available there. I think a lot of record keepers most record keepers have projection tools that can take into consideration things like salary increases, investment earnings, and future contributions. But I've always said, while I don't love the DOL's methodology, I completely understand why a governmental agency does not want to get in the business of projecting future earnings, projecting future contributions, and things like that. So again, is it perfect? It's probably not perfect, but I think it's at least a starting point for the discussion so that people can at least see, boy, I thought I was on track, I'm way off base, or hey, I'm in pretty good shape. So that's the change that's right in front of us. It's going to be happening, effective on statements immediately. Going back to some of these considerations around lifetime income. So the other part of the Secure Act, which was passed in 2019, included these provisions that make it more attractive for plan sponsors to offer these annuity products. Prior to passage of this, especially we saw in 401k plans, plan sponsors were very reluctant to ever put one of these products in their plan. And their concern was pretty legitimate. The concern was, hey, I'm bringing an insurance product into my plan that's going to, as David said, going to pay people income for the next 30 plus years potentially. How do I know that that insurance company is going to remain solvent for the next 30 plus years? What guardrails are on there to ensure that this insurance company meets their obligations? And the real concern was, if they don't meet their obligations, are all these individuals who've annuitized going to come back to me as the plan sponsor and say, you did a poor job selecting that insurance provider or that annuity provider? I think that was a very legitimate concern about their liability. And the Secure Act, we'll talk through the provisions, but the Secure Act does provide a safe harbor that allows you to focus a little more on some of the things that you would do at the time you make the decision to select that annuity provider. And as long as you've met those things at the time the insurance provider is selected, then you will be protected from future liability if something were to happen in the future. I think the other concern that you'll often see is, plan sponsors were concerned about, it was similar to the way an individual should review an annuity product and think about what restrictions are involved with this product and how easy is it to move away from them. Because for the most part, most of these annuities are proprietary products by the record keeper, and they don't all record, you can't just pick up your annuity and move it to another record keeper. Once you're with that record keeper, to maintain that annuity, you may have to keep it there. So when we talk about the in-plan, the safe harbor requirements, there's really three things that a plan sponsor needs to do. And the first is to complete, and this is directly from the DOL guidance, complete an objective, thorough, and analytical search of insurers that may provide the annuity. So the first thing you want to do is identify what companies out there should I take into consideration for providing this annuity product. So you first look at the insurer, and then you look at the product. For each insurer, consider their financial capability, as well as the cost and benefits of the product considered for addition in the plan. If the insurer satisfied 1 and 2, then at the time of the selection, the plan sponsor will be protected by the safe harbor. Now, going forward, what sort of ongoing requirements for oversight of this provider is required? You actually can receive, and we'll talk about what needs to be included, but you actually can receive an annual attestation from the insurer that has very specific statements as to their ongoing financial position, so that they can continue to meet their financial obligations. And when you receive that letter, that consists of your ongoing oversight of that provider. So these are some of the things that are required by the company that you select. The selected company must be licensed to offer guaranteed retirement income products, and that annual attestation must include the following: that they have a certificate of authority and file their audited financial statements to their home state, so domiciled state, that they maintain financial reserves to meet the statutory requirements for all states where they do business, and has not and is not operating under an order of suspension, rehabilitation, or liquidation from their state's insurance agency. In addition, they must agree to complete a financial examination by their domiciled state every 5 years, and must notify the plan sponsor of any changes to the requirements listed above. So if for any reason, when someone is annuitizing, if all these things aren't still in place, the insurer would be required to notify the plan sponsor that there have been changes. The other aspect that is, of course, of concern is the portability of in-plan lifetime income products. As I mentioned earlier, annuities are often record kept only by the insurer who underwrites the product. And so if you decide, well, we don't like this annuity, or there have been some new features and things that have come out that are more attractive than maybe what we currently offer in the plan, there were some provisions in the Secure Act that make it easier for the plan sponsor to change record keepers and to terminate an in-plan annuity option. And these are that it allows for qualified distributions to another plan, assuming that plan can record keep the product, or you can roll it to an IRA, which is, to be honest, is probably the more likely scenario if you have a time certain when you're going to stop offering that annuity product. Now, the one thing I would say before we talk about some of the considerations in selecting, when we're talking about in-plan annuitization, as a plan sponsor, I think it's really important to keep in mind, just because the annuity is offered in the plan doesn't mean people have to annuitize. I think sometimes that's a misconception with these products. It still ultimately is the participant's choice. And even if they're using that product during the accumulation phase, maybe they like some guaranteed aspects of the product, that alone also does not require them to annuitize. I think it's important that participants are fully educated and understand many of the dynamics of an annuity, but until they actually make that cliff decision that David described and sign the paperwork to create that lifetime income stream, there is generally no requirement that they annuitize. So, I think that's just one misconception that can be out there.
Greg, I think that's a really important piece here. It's kind of like, it's the analogy of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. You think of this as, giving participants options within the plan that are institutionally priced, and there may be some more familiarity with the record keeper, the product, because they've been in the plan for a number of years and they're familiar with it, as opposed to, retiring on a Tuesday and taking their money out on a Wednesday and walking down the street and trying to, pick which annuity provider that has a shingle up in downtown to make that irrevocable decision. So I think that's a way that some of our clients are thinking about this. Is, again, you're not forcing upon participants, but you're providing options for them as they think about how they want to spend down their accumulated assets. With respect to selecting an annuity from an investment perspective, when we think about this decision, first off, there's a couple of different types. There's fixed annuities, which we've talked mostly about today, which are, a product that has a stated rate of return. There's an adjustment period every once in a while, depending on the product, and there may be a minimum floor. So, for example, you could have a product that has a floor of 1%, and the new money rate is adjusted every 6 months. And so currently, with interest rates where they're at, let's say it's crediting 2% on new money, and it'll do that. It'll readjust its new money rate in 6 months from now. The other type of annuity that are less common, but are out there, are variable annuities, which are essentially a mutual fund. Think of it as a mutual fund investing in equities or fixed income securities, similar to probably what most of your investment options are, but then it has an additional layer of fees for the insurance component. And so there are those then do also have the ability to annuitize. I would say of the two types, most common utilization is that fixed annuity product.
David, I might add a little something on that, because I do think when I think about a plan sponsor thinking about should there be an annuitization option, I would probably focus in on that fixed annuity option. I think generally, in general, when someone comes and is thinking about annuitizing, unless they haven't saved enough, it would be a very rare occasion where the recommendation from really any financial planner or anyone would say, let's annuitize the full balance. It's generally handled exactly how David described it, which is, let's sit down and look at what your expenses are. And because what we're protecting against, the reason we want to generate lifetime income is to ensure that you never outlive your basic living expenses. That's really first and foremost what the goal is. And so the reason I would sort of focus on the fixed annuity is because of the guaranteed nature of the payments, the consistency of the payments. A variable annuity, especially if it's invested in equities, the payments can go up and down relative to what's happening in the markets. And that can be very unsettling for someone who no longer is generating income through work and is dependent upon what that annuity can provide. So I think someone new to sort of the world of in-plan annuities who's sort of looking at them for the first time, I would really focus in on a fixed type annuity. Another question that I get frequently, though, relative to these fixed annuities is, well, it sounds fixed, so you just get a certain amount. That's all you ever get. What about inflation? And David's going to talk a little bit about some of the different flavors of annuities, but typically what you see is a couple options available, or well, there can be many options, but two options that are often available when you're talking about generating or starting that fixed annuity is to get a flat rate, a flat amount that'll be pretty consistent for the rest of your life, or it is very common to have a different flavor of that that has a hedge against inflation. The difference is you're typically going to get a lower amount to start with if you take the one with the hedge against inflation, but it is an option, and that comes up a lot, especially with the fixed annuities.
No, great points. And, things that we would typically want to analyze with the plan sponsor if they were thinking about adding, we'll focus on a fixed annuity. Really want to hone in on the financial strength, which is, ultimately the claims paying ability of that insurer. We have the benefit and drop, a couple of things. So when we typically do investment analysis, we're able to meet with an investment manager and they articulate their investment strategy, and they'll be transparent about their holdings, and they'll show us their holdings over time. And we can have a good understanding of what their beliefs are and what their process is for selecting those underlying securities. A fixed annuity is a very different type of product. What we're able to do is analyze the rates of return, the guarantees. We're able to analyze the features of the annuity, but you don't have transparency into the underlying holdings. What these products are typically called a spread product, where the insurer guarantees a rate, they invest the portfolio, and they hope to earn something greater than that rate of return that they're guaranteed to the participants, and then they keep that delta or that spread as their fee. And so the thing that you want to analyze is, how are they investing that portfolio, and what is the risk that they're taking within that portfolio relative to the return that they're providing or they're guaranteeing? And the short answer is you just don't have transparency into those underlying holdings. There is a modest level of transparency, but there is not a deep discussion of the process and philosophy of how those assets are invested. So we have to rely on the claims paying ability that is developed by the rating agencies to give us an understanding of, how are those assets invested relative to the claims potentially against those assets. And so monitoring reports from Standard & Poor's, Moody's, AM Best is really a critical way to see how those rating agencies are view the risks associated with that portfolio. Greg talked a little bit about this already, but the annuity features are something that we need to analyze with a client and understand kind of what you're signing up for. So Greg mentioned that we start with a single annuitant, and that's going to guarantee they're going to my assets are going to buy $1,000. Then I can start to add features to that income stream that may be favorable to me, less favorable to the insurer, and it's going to start to discount the amount that I should expect for the rest of my life. So you could go from a single to a joint annuity. So I could annuitize my life as well as my partner's life, and instead of getting $1,000 because they're insuring over those two risks, it's a bit of an additional risk to them that one of us is going to live longer. Instead of getting $1,000, I might get $950. And I'm making up numbers, but just to give you a sense, you start to discount that how much my purchase of that annuity is going to result in. I may decide to get a life, so just for my lifetime, or I may do it for a period certain. So if I'm concerned that I may die, within 2 years of annuitizing, I may decide to buy a period certain for maybe 10 years. And so that annuity payment will continue for us, for that 10 years instead of just my lifetime. Greg talked about COLAs. You could purchase an annuity that has a COLA feature, and those can come in different flavors, different benchmarks. It could be COLA, it could be some other, rate of return. But my annuity would increase by potentially this inflation or cost of living adjustment. So instead of, again, getting $1,000, I may be willing to take $925 with a 3% COLA, because that will help insulate me from the rising costs of goods over the lifetime. So there's a number of different features that may be attractive to participants that you want to analyze and ensure that the product that you select, again, because it is a long-term investment, you may want to consider reviewing those. We talked a little bit about the liquidity provisions during that accumulation phase, both from a participant and a plan sponsor standpoint. But those are definitely items that, as part of that onboarding due diligence, you'll want to pay attention to, both from a participant liquidity standpoint and the ability as a plan sponsor to either terminate the option or wall it off to future contributions.
So David, one thing, there's a question here that I'll get to, and then but one thing I wanted to go back to about the annuity payment features. One of them that you mentioned is a period certain. And one of the things we talked about on the considerations, one of the negatives was it could limit the ability to leave money to heirs. Often you'll see those period certains can be anywhere from oftentimes 10 years to as much as 30 years. So if you're talking about someone in their 70s and they're thinking, well, I don't want to annuitize so much. I'd like to leave something to my heirs. That guaranteed period certainly is a way to, if you do die early. And I think the biggest fear is I annuitize a big chunk of money, and 6 months later I find out that I have a terminal illness that is going to move rapidly. That's what really prevents a lot of people from electing to annuitize or considering annuitization. Certainly the other one, he mentioned the joint annuity as well. I have a spouse. How do I ensure that they're taken care of as well? And annuitizing with them included on the annuity. There's even different flavors you can get where, there's two of you, if you do it with a joint with your spouse or your partner. If one of you passes away, you probably don't need as much money as you did before. So you can even set it up where maybe the payments are cut in half if one of you passes away. So there's really a variety of different features available. And that's, I think, in the consideration of the product, you certainly want to look at the insurance company, but you also want to look at what's available for the individual when they decide to annuitize. I do want to make some comments about sort of where I see this going in the future, but wanted to answer the one question. There was a question about the second quarter notice by the plan sponsor about the lifetime income projections. If we don't have the annuity in place, do we still need to send something? In virtually all cases, I've heard, I'm not aware of any situation where the record keeper is not doing these projections and putting them on the statement. So this is not one of those provisions that I think a plan sponsor has to figure out themselves. I think record keepers have generally understood that it's a requirement to do this annually. One other comment on that, though, I mentioned that there's a lot of tools available for participants to use to create their own projections. I'm also aware that many record keepers already on their statements put some of those projections on there, which again, that could also add to the confusion, because I think most companies recognize that their forecasting methodology is probably providing a more accurate snapshot of what is realistically happening with their savings patterns. And so I'm not aware of any situation where a record keeper is saying, we're no longer going to use our methodology, we're just going to use the DOLs. In almost all cases, what I see is we're going to meet the requirement, we're going to put this on the statement annually like we're asked to do, but we're going to continue to provide our own methodology as well.
Maybe, Greg, before we jump into the next thing, one thing that may seem obvious but may not seem obvious is, let's say, I've worked at 3 different companies in my career, and I've been lazy about rolling my assets over and consolidating them into a single plan. I'm going to get 3 statements, and it's going to show me 3 different income numbers. That again could be confusing, but it's certainly, the record keeper that you're outsourcing your administration to, that's projecting this lifetime income, is only taking into account the account balance that I have at plan A. It's not taking into account, they have no idea what I have at A, B, and C. So again, it may not need to be said, but I do think these are some of the questions that you potentially as a plan sponsor may get from participants when they see this for the first time, if they, look deep enough into into the footnotes for the methodology calculations.
All right, well, I think I'd like to move into sort of probably some closing thoughts. I think we've accomplished what we wanted to with today's presentation, which was sort of begin the discussion about annuitization, sort of an overview of what is annuitization, and some conversation about some of the changes that we're seeing. This was absolutely, these changes that we see relative to liability and portability, and even the DOL projection requirements, are all sort of what we're seeing as initial signaling by the government taking a more active interest in understanding and educating people on, as David said, decumulation strategies, but more specific, creating that stream of lifetime income that you can't outlive. I think, we've seen from defined contribution plans that maybe people aren't the best savers. I think as we move into this period where people are fully dependent upon their defined contribution plan, well, coupled with Social Security, but more reliant on their defined contribution plan than ever, we're probably going to find that people are pretty bad spenders as well. I think there's 2 risks. The first one is the overspender, who spends way too much and runs out of money, outlives their savings. But I think there's also a real legitimate risk for those people who don't really take the time to understand how much they've saved and how much they can withdraw of not spending the money ever. And so I think it sort of goes both ways. So as far as the future, first off, I am a believer in creating a lifetime income stream for your fixed expenses in retirement. I think it's important. Some people who've oversaved maybe say, I don't need to do that. I know I have plenty of money. But if you're unsure, I think this is a fantastic way to solve some of the uncertainty that maybe comes along with it. So anything that goes towards helping provide these type of products available in a retirement plan, I think is positive. At the same time, I don't see a lot of plan sponsors beating down the doors to add annuities to their retirement plans, especially on the 401k side. But when you talk about the future of in-plan annuitization, I think it'll look much different 5 years from now than it looks today. I think you're seeing companies reviewing and analyzing different types of products. I think there are even some companies that have not traditionally focused on the importance of creating a lifetime income stream for a portion of your savings are just really in the last 6 to 12 months talking about it a little bit more. So as far as the government action, at least getting the conversation started, I think that has happened. I do think plan sponsors who have not traditionally considered offering lifetime income within their plan are going to slowly warm up to the idea. But I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I've often said that initially these will probably be sold, not bought. But I truly believe 5 to 10 years from now, they will be bought, and you'll see pretty regular opportunities to generate lifetime income within all defined contribution plans. Traditionally, you typically see high availability of annuities in 403(b) plans at nonprofits and governmentals because their history was that they had to only be offered by insurance companies, and oftentimes the insurance company brought the annuity product with them. That is not what we saw in the defined contribution space in the 401(k) or for-profit companies. So, I'm optimistic that I think this is an option that for the people who need it, they need help identifying it, and a good way to help them identify it is to have it inside their plan. So overall, while some of these things are complex, I do think it's a move in the right direction for our industry. David, you came off mute there. Did you have something to add?
Nothing to add, Greg.
Okay. All right, well, with that, I don't see any additional questions. Thank you all for your time. If you have any questions about annuities or offering them, or maybe even the annuity that you currently have in your plan, please reach out to your Multnomah Group consultant. Thank you.